Hello, Grade 2. I'll be sharing the story of my family's migration journey. As far back as I know, my great-grandparents originated from Shantou. It's a region off the eastern coast of China, just northeast of Hong Kong. They speak a dialect called Chu Chao, which is another version of Chinese. Generations ago, they migrated down from China to southern parts of Vietnam. My father's family ended up in Can Tho, the fourth largest city in Vietnam and the largest city in the Mekong Delta. My father's family owned a noodle factory. He used to tell me of these stories how he used to deliver noodles at 4 a.m. in the morning to restaurants and stores on his pedal bike. My mother's family ended up in Bac Lieu, which is on the southern coast of Vietnam. Here's a picture of my grandmother and my mother when she was just a baby. I asked my uncle what it was like living in Vietnam during the 70s, and this is what he told me. He was born in Bac Lieu, Vietnam, just before the end of the war. The Americans called it the Vietnam War, and the Vietnamese called it the American War. For him, he called it the war, because it had such an effect on his life and everyone around him. There are some childhood memories of his life in Vietnam that still linger as his childhood creeps further and further away. He remembers being part of a large extended family with lots of cousins, aunts, uncles, great-aunts, great-uncles, and his grandma. He remembers playing at his grandma's house and climbing the juju tree that was on her property. He remembers playing with kids on the street, by the riverbanks, and in the farm fields. He remembers visiting my cousins in Saigon and going to see a Vietnamese opera. He also remembers buying jiao luo banh mi's from a street vendor, and he remembers it being so delicious. These were happy memories for him. He remembers moving around a lot. His house was also a store. Our family sold household items. It was on the bank of a river that flows through Bac Lieu. Then he remembers our family moving to his great uncle's farm just outside of the city. It's funny how some images stay with you when you grow up. Pictures like this bring back a lot of emotions for him. Some good ones because he was just beginning school, and some sad ones because some of the people who were in his life then have passed away. After some time, they moved back to Bac Lieu, but not home. They moved in with our great aunt. When he was old enough to understand, his parents explained to him that their home was taken by the government, and that was why they didn't have a home anymore. As for my father, he told me his reasons for leaving Vietnam as well. After surviving the war, he was at the right age to join the army. He was recruited to join the Vietnamese to go fight the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge were a very dangerous militant group, causing a lot of havoc in their country. My grandfather saw it as a suicide mission. If my father had left to go fight, there was a very high chance that he would not return. My father also just got married to my mother at the young age of 20. He had his whole life to live and a family to start. So I guess the decision was made between my father's family and my mother's family to escape on a boat. One night, my uncle remembers getting on a bus with his immediate family and dozens of other people and driving to the sea. They were packed onto a relatively small fishing boat. His parents had packed all they had possessed in some bags that were sewn from tarps. They left Vietnam in the darkness of night. People were not allowed to leave the country at that time. If you were caught trying to leave, the penalty could be jail or death. He asked his mom, "Why did we leave?" She said that she and my dad had nothing and they were homeless. They wanted their children to have as many opportunities available to them, and staying in Vietnam did not fit their plans. My uncle's memories of his voyage are vague. The things that have stayed with him are memories of sitting in a particular spot on the boat for a very long time. Being out in the sea was a very lonely place. Even though the boat carried over 1,000 souls, it was just a speck in the vastness of the South China Sea. They were visited by several pirate boats. These boats were really opportunistic fishermen looking to take advantage of the boats who were in need of help. Some traded food, fuel, and water for gold. Others weren't interested in making deals. They raided boats in search of gold, money, fuel, and young women. He heard of stories where many have died at the hands of these pirates. After floating out at sea for several days, a German fishing boat came across the boat that my family was on. They radioed in the boat and were picked up by the United Nations and then brought to Pulau Tengah, an island off the coast of Malaysia. This island was a UN Refugee Council camp for Vietnamese boat people as they waited to start their new lives. My family lived on this island for over a year in makeshift homes, and they were given food from the UN. While on the island, I was born in 1980. 4 months after I was born, our family was sponsored and flown to Barrie, Ontario, Canada. This is where I grew up, went to school, and spent 30 years of my life. It was an amazing place to live. It had all 4 seasons: summer, spring, fall, and winter. I got to play any sport I wanted, and I got to make great friends, most of them from playing sports. I arrived in Vietnam in the summer of 2010 for the first time. I was Chinese Vietnamese, but had never laid foot on Vietnamese soil. My grandmother accompanied me back so she could introduce me to my great uncle, whom I've never met. Once I started working at ISSP, I knew that this job was what I had dreamed of. Working with kids brought me so much joy and fulfillment. After working at ISSP for 2 years, I ended up moving to Ishmik, where I've been working for the last 4 years, bringing the total of years in Vietnam to 6. You could say that my migration story has taken me full circle to where my family originated from. I feel very fortunate that I've come back to see where my roots are and to experience life in Vietnam. I'm very grateful. And that's my migration story.